Okay, welcome everybody. We are back live once again, continuing our analysis of basically humanistic education and other movements, but mainly humanistic education, where it came from. We discussed Carl Rogers, all this interesting material over the preceding weeks. And tonight we're going to be going into Ireland specifically. We're going to look at how all this got going in Ireland. Just before we kind of get going on the stream, I would like to point you to where you can find us. If you want to, first of all, make any comments or anything, you're welcome to do so. And you can do that underneath the video. We're live tonight on X, which is the biggest audience, I suspect. We'll be on we're on YouTube as well. YouTube tends to throttle the videos. It's not as good as it used to be said least. And we're broadcasting from Rumble, and we're using Rumble, and Rumble's been very good. I have to say the studio is very good, and we are on Odyssey. So we're keeping the all tech alive. And if you would use Odyssey and Rumble and X, I would definitely recommend that. We don't get copyright strikes or anything if we play any clips or anything on those places. The other thing I want to say is that if you want to find me, you can do so through my link tree, which is underneath the video. That has all of my different bits and bobs there: email, YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble, and Substack. All the written work goes on Substack. I write the Globalist Education series, which is an ongoing project of mine over the next year or two. That'll be ongoing. Some of the ideas we'll be talking about over these streams, they're in articles that I've written. Some of those articles are published, more than will be published as we go along through the year. And of course, there's the Substack there, and it's my Substack. And then there is Bosco's Substack, Saints and Scholars Substack, or Bosco Soapbox is called, of course. But this is the last essay we discussed on the last stream, The Pedagogy of Liberation and its Discontents, which lays out some of the background to tonight's stream. And he's got a new one just published right now. If I haven't got this in the description to all of the links, I will do after the show. I haven't got time to check it all if it's right now. I think it's right, but if it's not, I'll update all of them after. But this is called The Engineering of the Soul, Therapeutic Education, Ideological Capture, and the Subversion of the Irish Child. It's a philosophical and a judicial analysis in light of natural law and Catholic moral tradition. And that's the basic kind of theme we're going to be talking about tonight, which is how all this stuff, which we kind of explored in the last few streams, got brought into Ireland through this thing called health education. And so before we go into that, I'm going to introduce Bosco and welcome him to the show.
Hiya, Don. Thanks for having me back.
Yep, great to have you as usual. I've read this essay before it was published, and it's great. It summarizes a number of things, but mainly it pulls on these two books which were published, which are going to be the basis of tonight's stream. And one of them is called The Facilitators, which was published in 86? Yeah, 86.
That's
by
right.
Browne Books. And these were people, there's four authors. Mainly Doris Manley was the main author of the lion's share of that book, I think. But the point I want to make out at the very start here is that all that we're doing in this area of education, we're standing on the work of people like this. And these people have come before us. And it's actually remarkable. I was struck. I read this book a couple of years ago, and the other one we're going to talk about in a moment. And I was struck at the time by how ideologically coherent, how philosophically consistent and precise these people were. I mean, the work they were doing was phenomenal. It's really good intellectual work. They really understood what it was they were talking about. There was no hyperbolic kind of slop, you might say. These were just really competent people. And I think that's what we should be aspiring to do, basically, is to kind of learn from these people. And so we're trying to make people aware of these are really good, sources, basically, on how all this got going in Ireland. They talk all about all of this stuff. Rogers, Maslow, Coulson, all of this stuff is in these books. So that's one I highly recommend. You can get that on archive.org. If you want
I
to
suppose
read
as well, Don, you can kind of contextualize it as well. And as I've kind of tended to do the last two occasions that I've been invited on here, I've kind of started with a a brief quote just to set things up. So today I kind of chose one from Ray Bradbury, from his book Fahrenheit 451. Kind
Mm,
of that trilogy of books that kind of looks at dystopian future, the other being A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley and, of course, 1984 by George Orwell. But this quote goes, "You do not need to burn books to destroy a culture. Just get people to stop reading them, and then make sure the people who do read them are taught exactly what you want them to believe." And the reason I chose that quote really is to set up today, because what people really need to understand is, and I've mentioned it in the essay, and you and I have discussed this at length, that the mind of a child is very plastic. It is very easy to manipulate, and there are various agents of socialization that can influence a child and how they think. And of course, all children, if they're lucky enough, become adults. And one of the main agents of socialization, of course, is the education system. And I would argue it's probably the primary agent, because for the first couple of years, of course, you've got the parents, the family, but ultimately, the child spends far more time in an education system during the most important formative years of a child's development, between the ages of, say, 4 or 5 to about 17, 18, or 19. And we know from evidence, and I've mentioned this before, that the Scottish criminal system can now defer to sentencing guidelines that includes mitigation for crimes that involve defendants under the age of 25. The reason being is they don't have the same level of impulse control. This is all supported by neurological or neuroscience research. And this again compounds the fact that children are very susceptible. So that kind of places the context, Don,
yeah,
for
no, that's
today.
very good. And it's very absolutely you actually pull on that in the essay. You said you'd have a couple of paragraphs there where you describe that. We'll get to it in a moment. But just to finish then, our other big source that you're drawn on in that essay, that new essay that you've published, is this book here, which I will hopefully show now. Yeah, this is the school around the corner just the same by Joseph McCarroll. It's also published by Browne Books. Unfortunately, I have checked high up and low down. You just cannot find a copy of. I couldn't even find a picture of the cover. That's actually my book, photographed on my filthy desk about an hour ago. That's the best I can do for you. That's what it looks like. There are copies available. You will find them, and this basically builds on the facilitators. And we were just saying before we came on, you actually reminded me that I hadn't even copped this. Like, it's been so long since I had looked at this book, but on the very back, it has also from Browne Books Limited, The Facilitators by Doris Manley, Loretto Browne, Valerie Cox, and Nick Lowry. And it's got the blurb, and then it has a number of people basically who have read the Is the School Around the Corner Just the Same by Joseph McCarroll, and one of them is Professor Mary McAleese, our former president, and she says it's provocative, accusative, tough, unstinting, and unsparing. So she had, she kind of was given a nod to this book as and it is. I actually think McCarroll's book is arguably more complete in a way, because he,
Yeah.
he draws on more uh, concepts than but he basically builds on their case that they put out. And he was an academic himself, and he actually describes. I made a note to mention this actually. He actually describes how, as a young person, he was kind of he he was at UCD basically, and he says it on page 3. He says that basically humanistic psychologists like Maslow and Fromm, that's Eric Fromm of the Frankfurt School, were welcomed because they seemed to correct previous imbalances in the other direction. Now, with some experience of life behind me and with the responsibilities of a parent, I realize that this is simply not enough. Now I am struck more by their incompleteness and provinciality of the
Mm.
views of the American humanistic psychologists. Irish culture and life are so open to influxes of new fashions from so-called advanced countries. It is so easy to accept the latest trend in educational theory from America and Britain and to adapt our educational practice to it. I believe that this is what has happened in the case of these programs. He's talking about the health education programs and the life skills programs and everything, which we'll explain in a moment. And I agree with Ruler's evaluation of the negative effect from the acceptance of humanistic psychologies into educational programs. Anyway, yeah. So he makes, this is a really strident critique of the whole thing, and that's the one. It's hard to get, but it's worth getting if you can find a physical copy of that book. And I'll just change back to our standard broadcast template. There we are. So let's start from the start. Another source also that I might play some clips from is Dr. William Coulson, who in the last show we showed a few clips of him. Actually, it was a clip of him, I'm sure, in that Adam Curtis documentary, basically talking about the nun, the famous nun episode in California, and he basically kind of grew. He was a close confidant and ally of Carl Rogers, and he grew cynical of it all, and Maslow did as well. But he actually spoke in Ireland at UCD. He spoke at several places around Ireland in 1993. He was invited over, and I actually have a recording of one of those meetings. This was at UCD, and I might play something from that maybe during the show tonight, because I've been trying to improve the audio, and I think I have it now where it's pretty decent. Like, and there's a few things interesting things he says. That kind of really, he explains the same kind of thing that we're going to talk about tonight. But it's good to hear him saying it. Like, he's a good speaker, and he's a credible source because he was there at the time. He was at the creation, so to speak, of all of this.
I suppose as well, Don, like, to put this into further context, I mean, I know I'm kind of broadening it here, but I overheard I think he's retired now, but he was a professor in social policy in Ireland, and he was discussing the fact that they were campaigning to reduce the voting age to 16. And again, it doesn't really kind of take a genius to work out why that is so. And I mention actually in the essay that I wrote about Pavlik Morozov, who is a bit of a paradigm case. And people might ask, who the hell is Pavlik Morozov? Well, in the context of the essay, which is very important for education and what we're going to discuss here, there's a Soviet myth. People don't know whether it's fiction or fact, but it and I think I've mentioned this before anyway, but whether it's fact or fiction, it doesn't really matter. What matters is the story that goes along with him and how influential his this theme is, because this boy Pavlik Morozov had denounced his father. I believe he was executed in 1932, apparently. And but before that, of course, the boy had squealed, ratted, informed, whatever you'd like to say, on his parents to the school system. And the parents subsequently, of course, killed the child. And Morozov became this kind of great Soviet hero. And it's important because there was a replacement of primary loyalties in the kind of homography or the deification almost of Morozov amongst kind of Soviet children, permitted by the state, of course. It was a Soviet, what shall you call, what you, like, it's like a Soviet fairy tale, as you will.
Yeah, it's a
And
founding mythology or
a
mythos kind
founding
of. Oh,
mythology, exactly. And like, the reason why it was so instrumental was that there's a kind of structuralist Marxist Leninist hostility to the family. We know that Marx despised the family. He saw it as a unit of bourgeoisie transmission of class consciousness. And the function really of the martyrology really of Morozov was that here was the perfect Soviet who was willing to betray his parents because his loyalty was primarily focused towards the state. And this is what we're trying to get at here, really, is because if you can control the children, if you can control their minds, well, effectively, you have set up a kind of a fait accompli with regards to democracy. Because what can appear on the outside as freely given is actually just preordained and programmed. Like we've discussed this so many times. And that's the most dangerous of all types of rule, because at least, and I've said this before to people, if you have, like during World War II, the Germans marched through the Champs Elysees under the Arc de Triomphe, and you had Parisians on either side, they were crying. Well, they knew they were being occupied. You can
Yeah.
respond to that, but you can't. It's very hard to respond when you don't even know you're actually being that you have no real liberty. And again, even the word liberty is kind of load bearing because I think from a Thomist perspective, there's no such thing as kind of a lack of control in any calculable sense because we're all socialized by something. When this whole blank slate myth is that we come into the world and everything that we're socialized, then we become. It's a bit more kind of nuanced than that. It's both nature and nurture, according to research, at least. We know that because children found even being reared by animals, they tend to mimic even the animal's behavior. But what it does demonstrate is that children can be great conduits for information, reproduction. And this is the context, really, of why we think this is so important.
Because it
I mean,
imprints on them so, like their minds are so malleable and are
that's
developing so
right.
fast that they are designed to take on what's around them. The children are literally like a machine that, in a
That's
sense,
right.
obviously not really a machine, but you know what I mean? Like they are like that's what their instinct is to do, is to, they're designed to take on information as rapidly as possible. Like there's that window of language learning which closes as you get older very quickly. Like, and if you can get like, I have a friend who's like his children are bilingual, like because they have another one of their parents is not from Ireland, like, but they have this. This is actually a huge advantage for those children because they're learning to speak two languages simultaneously, and
Yeah.
they're having zero problems.
Mm.
And I remember when I was researching that article that I did, I keep mentioning it because it's my biggest effort so far. But that fourth part of the Global Education series about Comenius and everything, the Great Instauration article, like Comenius and all these guys recognized at that time, like that. Okay, this is, and other people did. There was a guy, William Bade. He advanced language learning. He was an Irishman, like, and he advanced language learning, and they recognized that if you can get the children as early as possible into learning, like, because they would have been learning things like Latin, and
Mm.
Greek and everything as well, and even Hebrew, and so like they would have been that was just empirical reality, just observing. They were just observing this. So
Mm.
when you actually think about this, like it's very important to think about, well, what is being taught to your children, like how are they being socialized in schools? What are the values that they're being encouraged to have? This is a serious thing. It's very serious, and you should be interested in it. You should take an interest in it.
And of course, the selling of this, Don, is usually quite benign. It's like, in a way, which we're going to discuss later on, is the children's referendum in 2012. I
Mm.
mean, it was presented as, on its face, who wouldn't want extra protections for children? But that was this, the superficial claim. But what it really did was the formula for best interests, which is now kind of constitutionally protected, really, is at least mediated by the courts, is that the courts now, when they have a obligation to investigate and scrutinize any family matters, for example, they have to look at the best interests of the child, but that's mediated through experts, social workers, teachers, who themselves are ideologically captured. So the best interest of the child then is no longer actually the voice of the child. It becomes the voice of these technocrats.
Yeah.
And because you see, the child, we were told, well, if they're of certain youth or age, they're incapable of maybe uh, engaging in any kind of or expressing themselves adequately. So there'll be deference then to social workers again, who are uh, trained or rather inculcated with this kind of therapeutic subjective language. And this is where it becomes very dangerous. And this is very important as well, is that people ask, how have we gone from a country where to be patriotic, to believe in God, to believe in objective morality is now almost seen as old fashioned? Well, that's because of the education system,
Yeah, and
along with other agents.
yeah, and that's a great segue into what we'll actually introduce. One of the main avenues by which this has happened is that, you know, people will often bring up very true things about things like the Frankfurt School, and that, you know, the Frankfurt School altered culture and it was very influential and everything in ways. But another avenue is more mundane, and it's this concept of health education or related areas. There's
Mm.
several of them that became avenues, and in Ireland, this was the real way that this got into the education system. Basically, it's
Exactly, Don. Like, who wouldn't want kind of their children to be healthy? So
yeah,
that's how it's engineered to be approved.
yeah, and so the basic idea of health education is basically it's a popular term. It's used, and there's other terms that people use for similar things, life skills and what have you. But basically, you're talking here about, you know, like they portray it as this is just, oh, just learning basic things about your body, or, you know, your social skills or whatever. And so this is a, you know, we could talk about the international dimension of all this and how it got in through groups like UNESCO and everything, or the World Health Organization, etc. But we thought it'd be more interesting to focus on Ireland to make some of
Mm.
this like real to people. That we can do that another time, but this is specifically about Ireland tonight. And health education, basically, then, just to summarize here, you know, that's the blurb about it from the AI here. But so it's a cornerstone of public health, fostering knowledge, skills, and behaviors that improve individual and community well-being. I mean, straight away, the language of this, you know, the language of this is just bathed in like facilitation type language, your humanistic type language, where it's just all very non-judgmental and it's just behaviors, and we're just molding behaviors. And you can see how you get to nudging and how you get to, like, Cass Sunstein, you know, telling you that we need to just nudge society in certain ways to, you know, increase health or whatever. But
That's
the
right.
key message is that this is a kind of an involuntary form of persuasion. No
Mm.
one is coming to you in an open way and doing this. They're doing it in a kind of a sly, underhanded way, in the back door, so to speak. And McCarroll, I thought that he has a good part in the book, actually, but I won't talk about it now. But where he basically says, you know, that you're going into the child's brain in a non-rational kind of way, and you're basically not. You're not. It's straight away. There's deception and manipulation in the relationship, and it's
Oh,
all under the guise of health. And
exactly.
you bring up the point that this is actually, by targeting something like health, much like when you could talk about climate change and say, well, that's a global problem. Well, by making it about health, that's a universal problem,
Mm.
so to speak. So that's a way of getting every single person on targeted. So you can't escape. Every single individual, every single child has to have health education. They have to learn how to look after their health. So this is a great avenue for coming up with ways to manipulate children. You know, it's a great tool in the wrong hands.
That's right. And McCarroll talks about behavior modification, which really encapsulates the entire process. But I mean, this wasn't the first time, Don, either, that there was a movement to change education. I know you're more
Yeah, no,
uh,
well, we'll get into that in a minute. We'll go through the article. I have a few notes. I was just kind of laying out this first, but you're going to go into the progressive stuff. But yeah, that's yeah. Um, I think we'll move to the Health Education Bureau, and we'll kind of explain that when we come to it, kind of in the timeline, so to speak. So the Health Education Bureau, basically, this was a government body, basically. It was established in 1975 to promote health education and public health awareness, which operated until its dissolution in 1987, leaving a legacy of preventative health initiatives and public information campaigns. So this is a real institution. You highlight in the essay that it was created under Minister for Health Charlie Haughey at the time. I didn't know that.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I think we have to be clear here. We're not necessarily imputing any malice by people bringing these programs in. Like everything else, it's kind of what is fashionable. There's undue influence. Doesn't necessarily mean that the people instantiating it are malicious. But by the same token, it can be co-opted very easily. And it's, again, it doesn't necessarily negate malice either. It's just that we don't have that evidence. We can make inferences, but ultimately, what we can say is that there are consequences to it, and it can be co-opted for nefarious ends, and we're seeing that today. So,
Yeah. So this is the thing, and this is the institution specifically that tonight we're talking about. And basically, through the health boards, which don't exist anymore because they were replaced by the HSE years ago, but the health education boards used to be boards all over the country, basically, and this was how this stuff was getting in. So in the facilitators, they basically discuss two boards, and one is the Southern Health Board and one is the Northwestern Health Boards, all of which are gone now. They're amalgamated into this HSE structure. But this is where they were running these programs basically in social education, health education, life skills, education for life, things like that. And the specific documents that they're recommending material by Carl Rogers, who we kind of highlighted was like one of the main guys behind humanistic psychology, along with Abraham Maslow, and this other man called Sidney Simon, who wrote this. I have him up here as well, actually. Sidney Simon, yeah, it's values clarification concept. He's associated with this, and is a method aimed at helping individuals understand and articulate their personal values, leading to better decision making and personal growth. So this is human potential stuff, basically, that was brought directly in through this health education idea. And we're talking back in the 80s. This is going on, so it's remarkable to think that people were that in this. People kind of often think this stuff is like woke or whatever, but it's actually much more complicated than that. There's a much richer story to be told here.
that's right.
Non-judgmental, critical thinking, which basically means you won't think anything like your parents thought about anything. that's how Coulson describes it in the. I might play that clip in a while, actually. But that is kind of what we're talking about here. You won't think like your parents. You won't have their values. You will be a critical thinker, which is basically you're going to be critical of the traditional institutions, and you're going to be really fucking open to all the progressive ones.
Mm.
And you're going to be into self-discovery and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, that's Sidney Simon. So him and Carl Rogers were the two kind of authors that were kind of cited by these health education bureau programs that were sent out through these health boards to all the schools, basically. And
one thing, actually, Don, just one thing there, I never put into the essay, and I only found it subsequently, was because I remember it myself from school. There was a program that was kind of called CESP, SESP, which meant, or it was an acronym for Social and Environmental Studies Program, and that was kind of one of a small cluster of Irish curriculum development projects at the time, around the time of the 1980s, late or early 80s maybe, and effectively it was introduced. No, it's actually introduced from the 1970s. Sorry, even earlier, but it was kind of. It didn't have the same impact as the program we're going to discuss. And the reason being is largely it didn't have the backing of the education system and teachers by and large, because ultimately the Irish system was very directed towards achievement with regards to points system. So in the Leaving Cert, it was all directed to kind of this It was functionalist for gaining points in order to get into university or whatever. That was the primary goal of the education system. It was to develop and, students' preparedness for the workforce effectively. Now, this CESP, which was kind of, again, it was kind of an amalgam of different subjects like civics, um, environmentalism, but because it didn't have the same register, and that's why it's important when you mentioned health earlier on. The reason that this system came in through kind of a health paradigm was that it was almost seen as a kind of it got into the system far more insidiously than any other program. Because again, like who doesn't want to ameliorate the health of children? And I think that's what's key, really, as far as I'm concerned, because I think for a lot of the Irish populace, a lot of these programs, they're presented in a certain way, they're marketed in a certain way. And the Irish people then, they just, because of the type of marketing, they'll say, well, surely that's a benefit for my child. It's like the radical sex ed. It's promoted in such a way that they'll say, yeah, but we're just trying to foreclose what happened in the past where children were abused and they weren't aware they were being abused, whatever. So it's always kind of marketed in this way, but there's something far more, uh, as I say, insidious about it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's brings us to then there's a brief little there's another little document here that you reference, and I referenced it in the past as well. That this is the Spotlight report, which was produced by for the Oireachtas, basically. So this is a really good source if anyone is looking for a kind of a source about sex education or health or any of these programs. This kind of summarizes institutionally what happened, like, and how it developed in Ireland. And this, I'll just briefly show the title page. This is the Spotlight School-Based RSC Lessons for Policy and Practice, basically, written by Dr. Anne Nolan, senior parliamentary researcher, social science. This is from 2017 or 18. But the point is, anyway, is that it talks about this whole era that we were going to talk about tonight, and it's called about the Health Education Bureau, and yeah, that's where you got the information about hockey, of course, yeah, and of course it's using the language non-directive, so the child is not being directed, the child is only being allowed to explore and express himself or whatever, but and to clarify their value systems in relation to lifestyle options, so it's all very much we're not putting any we're not influencing the child, but of
Yeah.
course
That's
this is
real Rogerian as well. Yeah.
it is, and like Maslow, and Rogers as well to an extent. Actually, he wasn't happy with how this kind of was going either later on, but Maslow in particular, Maslow was very unhappy about this, and William Coulson describes this in the talk that I might play some clips from later on. He basically says that like Maslow was spent the last years of his life until he died of a heart attack at 60 or 62 or something, trying to basically correct this, because he said basically all this stuff went out. All this was great excitement about all this humanistic stuff. It went out, it went into all the journals, got picked up, and everyone was excited about this. We're going to reform education and all the rest of it. And but he realized that this shouldn't be applied to children. Basically, children can't self actualize. Okay, a child. There are certain things that a child needs to have structure and needs to be just have enforced through proper parenting and values, and say no, it's wrong to do that, you can't do that. That's it, just basic moral formation. You don't get to rationalize why doing something bad is actually good because you feel that way. And this is the great problem with applying these humanistic ideas to education, especially to young children, because you create an environment where you actually incentivize them to basically just have no morals and to reject all the values of their parents and their older relatives and everything, and families and communities. And so this is just a good summary here for anyone that's interested. Documenting this, the Health Education Bureau championed life skills education in Ireland in the 1980s, which was non-directive, person-centered approach that was in stark contrast to the traditional Catholic ethos, in which right may be objectively and absolutely discerned from wrong. This is also not just Catholic ethos. This is against the ethos of a classical education as well. So it's not just a Catholic hobby horse here. We're actually making a point that this is fundamentally going against the traditional Western canon, basically. Okay, brought from Greece. Classical education would also be against all this. So, and it talks about how the AIDS crisis, basically. Then that was how they got in the RSC program, was the AIDS thing in
Yeah.
the 80s. But Danny, that's just an interesting thing. If anyone's looking for a good source on some of this stuff, that's a great source, and you use it as well. So that's good. And
Never
so,
let a good opportunity go to waste, as they say. They did the
well,
same, of course, with Savita Halappanavar.
oh
So in
yeah,
this case, they were able to seize upon the, I suppose, paranoia of the AIDS crisis, which was very prevalent in the 80s.
yeah, exactly. And the thing with all of this is that, like you were going to say earlier on, but basically the progressive education movement preceded this. It's not exactly the same thing, but the progressives also were into the sex education programs. They were the ones who came up with the first sex education programs, basically, and they were very interested in, like, teaching about health and all this kind of stuff. And so the progressive ethos is important as an antecedent to all of this. And you have a good little summary in there where you talk about how um, uh, John Dewey and the progressives, basically, how they kind of in the 19th and early 20th century, basically, they became very dominant, and they're kind of building on earlier antecedents like Rousseau in Emile, Pestalozzi, Montessori. And I also would argue John Amos Comenius, who I argue in the 17th century is the very first progressive educator. And
Mm.
if anyone wants to read my article on my Substack, it's called The Great Instauration. It's all about this, basically. And I have another one where I talk all about Rousseau as well. I think that's part 2 of the Globalist Education series. I think it's called Utopian Education or something like that. But basically, the progressives, like the humanists, they had support. They gained a lot of institutional power. And so as all of the training of teachers was being centralized, they become the kind of state model of education. And
Mm.
Dewey also becomes cynical of some of this too. So there's a kind of there's a tendency to demonize people, which I agree. I
That's right.
actually,
Yeah.
like, I'll to be honest, like, when I'm writing, like, about all this stuff, like, I am so generous to anyone that I'm writing about, because you have to understand that a lot of these people were actually caught up in something, and they genuinely were trying to
Mm.
do good. Like, I
Mm.
think a lot, and
Yeah.
like John Dewey began as a Hegelian kind of guy. Basically, he was into Hegelianism philosophy, and he transposed more over time then into what you would call, basically, um, the American ideology, or this progressive American kind of thing. It was called instrumentalism, which is basically a type of what do they call it? The instrumental philosophy, basically. And it's
Yeah.
basically, like, it was very American philosophy, and it's associated with a guy called Charles Pierce as well. But that becomes central then to all the teachers colleges and all in America, and all the you know uh, all the institutions training the teachers. And then the Progressive Education Association is created, and these ideas get spread around. And this is kind of like that with humanistic psychology. There's always these fads in education. That's what I've
Mm.
learned from looking at this for years at this point, is that there's always fads. There was the progressive fad, which kind of comes, it still exists. I mean, I would argue that the Educate Together schools are basically a progressive school,
Oh, yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
As you
and
said, I
they're
mean,
powerful.
he was very critical of unstructured sentimentality. And ironically, that's what we have today. But even Dewey himself, um, he backed on a guy called Francis Walker, or Parker, rather. And this guy was serving as a principal in the Cook County Normal School in Chicago in around the latter end of the 19th century. And Parker's work, especially in 1896, centered on his concept of the school as a community. And that's really kind of the central node, really, of progressivism. He argued that the classroom should mirror society, kind of teaching children how to cooperate and function as citizens rather than merely memorizing facts. And let's be honest, I mean, I don't think anybody could disagree with that. But it's not necessarily like that's why, yes, the progressive movement preceded the humanistic movement, but they're not the same. And I think people sometimes
Yeah,
tend to think that there's a chain between them both
yeah,
because, or a link rather, a connection. But there really isn't, insofar as, yes, they both challenged the hegemony of classical education, but they are distinct.
yeah. They're distinct movements for sure, and there's different kind of psychological movements behind them. Basically, that's what's kind of happening. But basically, yeah, they are critical of the kind of classical models, basically, and they're inherently interested in the child as an individual, separate from the kind of bourgeois family institution, or what you would call like the nuclear family, maybe, or whatever. And that's they're very anti-hierarchical because they want the child to kind of be part of a new social structure. So each of these movements is very concerned with creating a new social structure, and that's how I would say that's what motivates. That's what's driving it forward. And
Mm,
that's why it gets picked up by certain backers or whatever. But this the idea is that basically through the humanistic stuff in the health education, the teacher is now a facilitator in a very direct way. It's not even intimated. It's actually asserted basically that the teacher is now like this is a different skill set,
mm,
and so the teacher is literally a facilitator, and this arrives in Ireland through the Health Education Bureau, and it makes a big splash. There's backlash because there's a big Catholic population in Ireland, so certain people were very twigged onto this, and they began researching it and opposing it. And uh, this is the two books that you're drawn on here. And so you cite McCarroll here, and he says the Health Education Bureau's own manual defines health education as the sum of experiences which favorably influence understandings, attitudes, and conduct relating to individual and community health. A definition,
mm.
as McCarroll notes, that encompasses virtually the whole of human existence. So it's a universalist tool in order to basically access the child and all children basically on this level. It's a very powerful tool. And then you cite Manley, where she basically says it defines health as continuous improvement towards towards living life more fully, joyfully, and productively, and as the process of fulfilling one's potentialities. The program then deduces from this definition a mandate to develop in teenagers the ability to clarify one's values, to formulate a personal philosophy, to be aware and find meaning in their own sensuality and sexuality, and to help each other choose the lifestyle he finds most appealing. And what strikes me about all this humanistic stuff is that, like, a lot of people will say this is communism, and this is, but actually it's not. This is actually hyper capitalism. This is hyper consumer culture, where you can just select your lifestyle,
That's
and if it
right.
feels good, it's good. You cannot tell someone that their values are wrong, because hey, that's my choice as a consumer. I went into the shop
That's
and I
right.
picked these values,
That's
and if
right.
I want, I can go into the shop tomorrow and pick another set of values, no
Yeah,
problem.
that's right. And they're, yeah, I mean, and they're interchangeable as well. I mean, that's why we have all these a million and one genders, and we're told that each are legitimate. But I think ultimately, what you were saying there, which I find really interesting, is the kind of presuppositions that are presented that are very rarely, if at all, challenged. Like, what makes a good person? What is goodness itself? They're all, it's a presupposition because ultimately it goes back to Rogers' kind of person centered psychotherapy, because Rogers had articulated that he offered unconditional positive regard, being non-judgmental, and also that he would be non-directive. But as we've discussed in previous editions, that's actually impossible. So that's what I'm saying. Like, if a child says they want to assume a certain sexuality or whatever, that in itself, they are being socialized by some alternative paradigm, some alternative ideology. And in kind of the Rogerian framework, even the silence itself, where it acts as non judgmental, is itself a directive. Because in any other kind of dialogue, especially with an adult present, if someone says something that society might consider disordered, well, the adult will invariably challenge that and ask why. But in this, the child is always given to themselves with regards to their own subjective feelings. Well, all feelings really are subjective, but ultimately it's to search internally, but the provocation is from outside, you know?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the key to this, is that the child, as you highlight, or and McCarroll and everyone highlights, that the educator, or now the facilitator in reality, basically has the power to, under the guise of public health, has the ability to modify the child's behavior.
Mm.
That's the fundamental difference here. This is not an educative process. This is a manipulative process using health as a justification. And you have a good quote. Well, you have your own. I'll just quote you here. You say the gap. So you're describing basically the gap between knowledge and right action. So we have a choice to make in our behaviors. We can decide, like, basically, we have to decide to do the right thing. Like, so you say the gap between knowledge and right action is real. Plato acknowledged it in the Protagoras and returned to it throughout the Republic and the Gorgias. But the classical and Christian analysis of that gap does not identify it as a deficiency of emotional reinforcement. It identifies it as a consequence of human fallenness, of the formation of bad habits through the repeated abuse of freedom, and of what St. Paul names with terrible precision as the slavery of sin, knowing the good and being incapable of choosing it. These are moral and spiritual conditions, not emotional deficits. They require moral formation and spiritual help, not psychotherapeutic reprogramming. So this is the crucial thing. You're talking about the conscience here, basically. And
Yeah, and it's, as I said before, there's this great myth that exists today, and you'll often hear people say, well, I don't like the church because I don't want anybody controlling what I do with my body. But that's presupposes that there is no controlling kind of mechanism, but there always is, because ultimately, even down to, how even some dopaminergic, kind of dopamine release, just say kind of, you have that predisposition. Well, that in itself is just a physical marker. It's not it requires context in order to flatten into something behavioral. So
yeah,
ultimately, you're always controlled by the context, by your society, insofar as how you view a certain aspects of your own behavior. So when people say, "Oh, I don't like the church when they control me," well, what they're really doing is they're being controlled by some other ideology. There is no neutrality here. Like, that's the great myth of modernity. And
yeah,
what Christianity did very successfully over thousands of years was that to say, listen, unbridled pursuit of different types of pleasures actually is very is not good for the person, but also for society. For example, you get infidelity, you get, which causes in itself problems with regards to you know child rearing and who's going to inherit what, because maybe it's not your child at all. And then you've got all these different divided loyalties. So all these things had a reason. It was directed towards the right order of society for the common good. But what's happened now is, because everything is subjective, as long as I feel I want X, Y, or Z, well, then we're to accept it. But then that transforms into something objective because it doesn't stay there. It's like a person who says they're trans. they might say, well, this is how I feel, but there's a demand on you and I to accept their subjective feeling.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, that's the kind of crux of the moral question here that we're dealing with. It's not simply a matter of altering behavior through psychology or psychotherapy. And actually, let's talk about emotivism, because that's kind of what we're getting at here. So this term emotivism, you've used it before. He's associated with Alistair McIntyre, but it's an older term. But basically, what it means is that I think you say this actually. All evaluative and moral judgments are nothing but expressions of preference, attitude, or feeling. So basically, all of these evaluative and moral judgments are just how you feel, and if you
that's right.
feel something, then that's fine. You know, that's
That's
all it is.
valid. Yeah.
But McIntyre, in this famous book he wrote, or this whatever speech he gave, it turned into a book. But basically, he talks about this, basically, that this is the kind of dominant theme of modern life. Basically, everything is just about feelings, and that justifies everything, unfortunately, now. And he's basically decrying all that, you know. But agreement in moral judgments on this view cannot be secured by rational method, for there are none. It can only be secured, if at all, by producing non-rational effects on the emotions or attitudes of those who disagree. So yeah, it's all about adjusting uh, through therapy, through some kind of process, your how you feel about things. And so you kind of describe, then you're talking about Doris Manley in the Facilitators book, how the Western educated elite basically are united by a philosophical unity, not a formal conspiracy. They don't actually necessarily, they're not conspiring to do something wrong, but they actually are just so caught up in this way of thinking things. And I actually think this is the kind of central thing of what my whole work has been for the last couple of years, has come to this realization that it's not necessarily a formal conspiracy, although it expresses itself in that way in some ways. But actually, what we're actually dealing with is actually, like, the university is the central engine of everything. It creates every professional,
Yeah.
every activist, every journalist, every writer. They all go to university, basically. Very few
Mm.
people in modern society who have any standing have not gone to a university, or at least a very high level, third level education. That's how you get in. And you know, they have been. It's a paradigm. We're in a paradigm, and people think a certain way, and that's what I've realized with the education stuff. So in so many ways, like that, it's not necessarily a formal conspiracy, although I think there are times where it is expressed as a formal conspiracy in order to get a certain policy or a certain process in place. But it actually is that they're just so united in this way of viewing life, basically. And so they're very motivated by this, you know, in a powerful way. Because to them, it's like you're taking away their freedom. You're trying to say to these people, you know, you're actually, you can't just decide to do wrong. You know, you shouldn't be deciding to do wrong. And they don't, and they want to keep that power almost, you know.
I suppose as well on that point, though, Don, with regards to conspiracy, yes, there may not be a formal conspiracy insofar as all the way down that the managerial class are not aware that they're participating in a conspiracy. But I think I've mentioned this kind of analogy before, that if you, we all know that jeans are a very sturdy product, right? They're made from denim, they have rivets, whatever. They will last a long time. So then you'll have this jeans manufacturer who will ask, well, how do I sell more jeans if my products last so long? I'm going to reach a kind of a plateau. Well, this is where the fashion industry is co opted, because they'll say, well, we'll get people to throw out their uh, bootcut jeans, which are still very, which are still fine. And in order to do that, then they manufacture a marketing campaign. They might get one or two celebrities like, what's her one? Your one Sweeney with her good jeans.
Sydney
And
Sweeney. Yeah.
Sydney Sweeney, yeah. And of course, what happens then is, the marketing campaign then enters into different areas of influence. For example, in schools, you might get popular kids who'll go, well, these are I want to be a trendsetter, or you might even have influencers today. But you might have, these influential kids in a school and they start wearing the jeans, and suddenly they're active in the conspiracy, but unwittingly. They're still promoting the sale of jeans, but they're unawares. And I think people fail to understand that when we talk about conspiracies, because it doesn't mean that every link in the conspiracy is aware of the conspiracy. But people can, it's like throwing a boulder down a steep hill, and the boulder starts to collect detritus, whatever. And that can be foreseen. If you're placing that boulder down a ravine and you can see a lot of detritus there and go, well, if I throw this boulder down there, and because of the momentum, it's going to pick up detritus, leaves, moss, whatever that is uprooted. Well, that's foreseen. And I would say, I would argue that at the top, at the more senior levels, now again, this is speculative because the very notion of conspiracy is concealment. But like I would argue that people say, well, we do want to change the direction of, education for a purpose. We're doing it for a purpose. I think the middle managers, uh, as you said earlier on, they're most likely doing it because they genuinely think it's good, right? Without actually exercising really or scrutinizing why is it really good. And it's quite dangerous and reckless. Like not everybody's promoting radical sex ed looks in the mirror and says, I'm going to be a sexual deviant today and I'm going to kind of corrupt children. Some of them genuinely think they're doing something good.
Absolutely, yeah.
Doesn't follow that it is good.
Yeah, and
But
it feels good. They're in the paradigm. It feels good. What they're doing
exactly,
feels good,
exactly.
and
And
that's the
ironically,
important thing.
they're part of they've been as manipulated as anybody else.
Yeah, and I mean, just to kind of to briefly hit on we're talking about emotivism there, basically, but you have a quote because he also, I see McCarroll actually draws on Eric Vogelin's Enlightenment or Evolution. I drew on that book as well in the earlier part of the Global Education series, but basically, you have a quote here, and it summarizes what that whole argument I made in one of those essays was, which is very important. He said Vogelin identifies a civilizational transition in which the growth of the soul through an internal process nourished by communication with transcendental reality is replaced by the formation of conduct through external management. This is the key thing. Like this is the reason that I'm writing the whole series, actually, if I'm honest, because the more I think about it, when I was researching all that years ago, a couple of years ago now, and trying to assemble those early kind of ideas, like, and doing those essays, like that was an absolutely mind-blowing realization that this is what it actually is. It comes down to, like, it's a paradigm. The paradigm is that you're no longer connected to a civilization as part of a continuity. Your tradition has meaning. You have the classical and Christian heritage and everything. All of this stuff, your culture, your ancestors, all this stuff. This is all nourishing. Like this is why we're nationalists. We're nationalists because we want to live in a society that has real meaning in it.
That's
That
right.
we are actually part of a great chain of being of some sort.
Exactly. And reproduces our culture
and reproduces
because,
our culture and our values
yeah,
and our very DNA.
that's right. Exactly.
And that's what Vogelin is. His point there is that you're, instead of the growth of the soul through an internal process nourished by communication. So there's an internal reality, and this is what McCarroll is warning about. That's why I recommend his book so much. That book is so good because he points out that rather than having this internal world in where you don't have to share every single thought, every single personal thing in your mind, that you might be embarrassed by, you don't have to share it. You
That's
don't
right.
have to blurt this stuff out. There was all these games that they were doing, but he has a couple of really good points actually, where he talks about groupthink as well, and
Mhm.
he talks about how a lot of this is groupthink institutionally. I completely agree, and he also talks about how it perverts the Socratic dialogue. So on page 28 there, he says, because like it's like they're calling it a Socratic something else when they're trying to get the children into these groups and get them to explore what's on their mind sexually or whatever, giving up these kind of personal information. And he says, and they're calling it a Socratic, what's they call this? A Socratic discussion, I think, which is called a Socratic discussion. The fact, and he says that it's not a Socratic discussion. He says here again, words are given new meanings in order to get people to accept a new technique because it is called after someone whom our tradition has taught us to respect, i.e., Socrates.
Mhm.
It is, and of course, he was murdered, wasn't he? It is
That's right.
dishonest for telling the truth. It is dishonest because the technique involved is the opposite of the Socratic method. It repudiates it repudiates intellectual step-by-step question and answer inquiry. Because so basically, a Socratic dialogue is actually where we sit and we're discussing a subject and we ask each other questions that you
That's
have to
right.
answer that are very much directed to the concepts and the ideas around what we're talking about. We're not talking about red herrings, not talking about what about this. We're actually trying to stay on a certain topic and faithfully just pursue the truth. And it's not about defending your position as much as it is discovering a greater level of understanding through the
Well,
process dialogue.
Thomas Aquinas would have done something very similar, like in his Summa Theologiae, he steelmans oppositional views. And that's the correct way that reason operates. But today, because of, this preference for kind of subjectivity, there isn't even an argument, it's just feeling. And I think
Yeah,
that's where the
and
danger
that's in
lies.
law. That's in law now because if you offend a minority, like someone who's gay or someone who's a foreign nationality or race or whatever, that is uh, basically a crime. And if someone feels offended by that now in law, that can be prosecuted. And people
That's
have been
right.
prosecuted all
That's
over
right.
Britain, especially. Britain is the worst hellhole for this imaginable. Um, but yeah, that's that. And he goes on here about the Socratic dialogue, about how it's the opposite of what a Socratic dialogue is. They're calling it a Socratic discussion, where the child has to blurt out all this stuff. And he's saying this is not a Socratic dialogue, and they're actually taking the term basically and twisting it to mean the opposite of what it actually is. And he says, like the health educators, Socrates focuses on the gap between knowledge and action. If we say that people do not intentionally do something they regard as wrong, he suggests that we must conclude that when they do wrong, it must be because they mistakenly think that what they are doing is right. How can that happen? The difficulty Socrates suggests is that our appreciation of the consequences of our actions is faulty. If we had been aware of the full consequences of our action, we would not have acted as we did. This should not be taken, however, to mean that Socrates is using a crude argument of the type, if only we knew that not washing our teeth caused dental decay, then we would all wash our teeth. Socrates knows only too well that the real problem is not the lack of matter-of-fact knowledge and emotions, but their presence. The problem, he suggests, is that our appreciation of the ultimate consequences of our actions is distorted by the presence of emotions that pulls us in the wrong way. So our feelings usually get in the way of
That's
these
right.
kinds of decisions.
Yeah.
That's the problem with all of this. And it's all built on this. It's all built on, well, if you
Well,
feel a
that's why
certain
the
way,
slogans work today, Don. If you look at most slogans, as we've discussed, they're incoherent.
yeah,
Like, look at love is love. What the hell does that mean? Like,
love is love. It's a statement of, like, it's actually not even a statement. It's just saying, like, a cat is a cat.
tautological. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also like, as I've said before, and I'm probably repeating myself here, but I may love a hamburger, but it doesn't mean that I hold the same uh, love for a hamburger as my granny. Do you know? That's
Yeah.
because it's a form of kind of equivocation. And sadly, people respond now to slogans because they have an emotional register. And actually, on that note, with regards to the group work, and I thought Joseph McCarroll made a fantastic point here, and you've brought it up there, Don. And that is about kind of if you are a dissenter in a group, it's almost pathologized. It's like, in a way, if you go to a clinical psychologist and just say they're saying, "Oh, you're interacting with the clinical psychologist with regards to your own mental health, and you think there's a flaw in it, right? Because ultimately, even under the legislation, you're allowed to participate in your own mental health recovery. But often that is that is framed as obstructive, and it's framed as almost a pathological symptom of your mental health, rather than a genuine point of difference. And that's what McCarroll points to as well. He says that ultimately kids in a group, because of the role of peer pressure, but even if they do raise their head above the parapet, they're kind of their view or their position is kind of pathologized to be meaningless or to actually court ostracization.
Yeah.
So that's very dangerous in that kind of
Yeah, especially,
environment.
yeah, with those youth kind of tendencies, like to be conformist and to be worried about ostracism and
Exactly.
everything. Like it's awful. And the other thing is, he he links it with, like, I thought it was interesting too. He links it with like utopian social engineering, a la Jeremy Bentham, basically.
Mm.
And this is another thing I'll be drawing on later on. But like that's the utilitarian purposes of this, so there's a lot of like philosophical and ideological antecedents to all of this, which feed into, which is why it's a mosaic, and
Mm.
you have to basically look at it analytically as much as possible and try and be reasonable with the different thinkers and everything.
But
And
he made another point actually about Bentham, and
oh
that
yeah.
was he said that at least Bentham was articulating that the prisoners know they're being reformed.
Yeah.
But regards to kids being facilitated, they're unaware. That's what
Yeah.
makes it the most dangerous, is because if you think you're being kind of directed, at least as to give Bentham his dues, is that like the prisoners are aware from the moment they entered into prison that they're if there's any programs there, it's a program to rehabilitate. Whereas these kind of uh, programs aren't so patent for the as regards to the purpose.
Yeah, and they're not respecting basically the child as an individual, really. Like for
That's
all they're
right.
talking about, they're actually demanding that the child basically kind of give up a level of their independence and privacy,
That's right.
um, and be kind of invaded by this, And it's like, oh, you don't want to share with the group.
That's right.
Are you trying to hide something? Are
That's
you
right.
are you insecure? You can see this is like if someone says like I don't like spiders, what you want to fuck spiders? This is this kind of like ridiculous
Yes.
level, like that meme, like I don't like this gay stuff. That means you're gay. Like this is no, it's quite the opposite. Like it's that's where we are. Like there's I just realized over the years there's so much of these kind of pop psychology, totally bullshit fucking things like that are just quick fire, you know, that people just throw out there and have no basis in reality. You know,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
oh, you don't like spiders, eh? We know what that means. But, like, that's, yeah, it's shocking stuff. Like we are, but like, um, yeah, there's so many things from this. This book is great, and he has this basically he compares it then with traditional education, which is what we're arguing, basically, that traditional forms of education, whether classical or Catholic or whatever, ones that respect natural law, basically, those types of education, they actually are very respectful to the child. Like, and the idea basically is that the child has to be given knowledge before he can really develop his own ideas. Okay, so
Mm.
if you've ever played music, and I think you've played a bit of music yourself, like, I mean, you could hand a child a guitar and say, just bash away on that aimlessly there.
Yeah.
Or I could show you how to play chords. I
Mm.
could show you what scales are. I could show you the modes. I could, bring you on this path where I introduce you to all of these different things. And you know that feeling when you're learning things like that, especially when you're young, it's very inspiring. Like when you make a breakthrough, you're like, oh, I can do this now. See, education should be kind of initiatory in that sense, in that you talk about this in the article, you should have this respect for your teacher. Your teacher should be someone who you actually do respect as a guide, that does understand the stuff and that can teach you things. And then once you have learned those things, that's why I'm very cynical of this whole, like the progressives are very anti-rote learning, as are the
Mm.
humanistic people. Like, you should all just feel good, and you just work it out as you go along. That's a level of that is fine. Like, I'm a musician as well, and I find that the best thing about music is a good analogy, actually, because what you can do is that, yeah, you have to spend time being creative where you just play freely, you know. But if I was to actually like tell someone, okay, do you want to go learn guitar? How would you go do it? I would say divide up your practice into different things. Like maybe spend 20 minutes just learning your scales and maybe some theory stuff. Spend 20 minutes learning some songs, and then spend 20 minutes completely free playing. just
Mm,
throwing in whatever comes into your mind. And
mm,
that to me, that's the best combination, where you're developing your knowledge, and then you can apply that knowledge and be creative with it. Because if you and then you can overdo it, where you only rote learn. Absolutely,
mm,
you can just rote learn everything, and you can kind of be a machine. And a lot of those guys, they aren't necessarily the most inspiring players often, because it's just too there's not much creativity in it. Like, it's very technically good, but it's not very creative. And that's how I kind of look at the education aspect as a whole. Is that you should be some room for you to express yourself, like creative writing and all this kind of stuff. But you have to learn your vocabulary. You have to learn
that's
grammar.
right.
And I actually regret, that I didn't have more of that. Like, I had early on when I was very young, I had very strict teachers when I was in primary school. They were old, like, and yeah, it was harsh, I have to say, but like at the same time, they actually did drill, like, and I forgot a lot of it then, of course, but because when I left primary school, I just lost interest. But like, because there wasn't that kind of discipline, and I wasn't in that kind of
Mm,
environment anymore. I actually wish I had a much more like structured type of education, like, because I think young men are being failed now. I think one of the reasons that women are doing so well relative to men in education is that the system is systematically designed to basically fail those men. It's feminine. The system is feminine. It doesn't actually respect male genius and male talents and male attitude or disposition. Because men are the ones who tend to just focus on excellence so much. Like, a guy will just focus on a subject, and you should just let him do that. Um, but the system just doesn't really reward that now as much. And that's I think a lot of young men are failed because of that. And they don't have male
yeah,
teachers either, of course.
there's kind of an aversion to kind of rules, and it's not to say that yeah, who wants rules all the time, but in mathematics there's axioms. They're types of rules, as you said earlier on, or a few seconds ago. If you're if you like writing, well, there are axioms there. I mean, if you composed like I'm not a fan of James Joyce. I think there's a lot of bullshit with regards to his material, but like this stream of consciousness. But like, if it's meaningless to you, well, then what do you? What's the purpose of the book? I would have assumed that a book is to convey something that the reader will also pick up, that you're interacting with the story created by the author. But this is again as part of this kind of postmodernism, uh, uh, deconstructionism, where I can see a meaning that isn't even intended by the author. It's like Jackson Pollock, the painter, and was it he was in uh, expressionist, was it? Or I'm not a
Expressionist, yeah, I think, yeah.
and like, I think somebody had, you have
Supported by the
this.
CIA, allegedly, I believe.
Well,
Was
there
he?
you go.
I think he was.
But
I think they promoted that kind of art. Yeah, I'm sure,
yeah, and like, I
in the
think
Cold War.
there is this kind of avant-garde kind of upper middle class kind of swagger and pomposity with regards to art critics and every type of critic, even kind of restaurant critics. And of course, apparently some monkey splashed a few bits of paint on a canvas, and they, as a joke, a bit like the James Lindsay and his other cohorts submitted these
Fake
articles that were
papers. Mm.
exactly, and like these critics were looking at this painting effectively painted by a monkey. And they were calling out, "Oh, this person is a genius! So this is a new
Yeah.
Jackson Pollock type." And this is how absurd it is, like, or it's
Yeah,
like
I mean,
Tracy
you've got
Allen
galleries
as well.
and
Yeah,
big toilets hanging in galleries and this kind of stuff, and you're like, oh, okay, like,
that's
have
right.
we not
Yeah.
like grown out of this now? Like, I could see how that could be something that someone would do, maybe, 80 years ago, maybe in the postmodern period in the 60s and 70s or something, where you'd go like, oh yeah, this is like some deliberately, it's all kitschy and everything is ironic and woohoo, imagine if we did that, woohoo, like, I'm interested in design and all, and like, I have to say, like, I grew out of, like, once I learned about that movement, like, I was like, okay, this is all very like in jokey and like, you know self-indulgent, but there's no actual meaning to it. Like, you're basically just it's weaponized irony. You're just like, I'm ironic, and You know, it's like now, like people are so ironic. The young people now are so cynical and ironic. Everything is ironic, you know, and so it's
Mm.
actually weird to actually articulate real emotion. Oh, you know, there's this thing of, oh, I got you mad, bro. I got you mad, bro. Well, yeah, you should get mad sometimes, you know? You should get mad. You should be angry about things sometimes, you know?
But
There's a
even
fear
going,
of real emotion, like real emotion now has been sucked out of people. Like that's why we're all kind of people can't react appropriately to the invasion of our country, like because we're all so. Oh, I don't want to be seen to be mean, man. I don't want to be a mean man. I don't want someone to call me racist. That would be awful, wouldn't it? You know?
well, it's like the manufactured kind of public grief phenomenon that we've seen, or phenomena, more than one, I'd say. You know, like when Princess Diana, died, people sobbing, and sure, like we all know that these people would walk past you in the street and wouldn't give a damn about you. You know, or so, there's some celebrities after dying, and there's people weeping online, and it's so performative. But again, this goes back again to people have been trained to kind of behave this way in public. When I know, listen, the opposite isn't good either. That you're too constrained and you don't allow any release of any type of emotion. But this is where kind of Thomas Aquinas would argue that, well, any type of extreme is bad. It's like, if you're fasting all the time, it can be bad for your health. But if you're overindulgent, it's obviously bad for your health as well. So you eat in moderation and you can even fast in moderation. And we've seen, like, it's like Micheál Martin said in The Dáil, he said, oh, we had a very unsatisfactory or uncomfortable relationship with sexuality in the past. But sure, we have the same now. It's just the opposite extreme. That's all.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
absolutely. Like the Derrick history, the Derrick history or Whig history, like um, like there's a whole narrative like that. Ireland was sexually repressed. Well, I don't know, man. We had
that's
a lot of
right.
a lot of fucking kids going on. You know,
I know,
I don't
yeah. I
know.
mean,
Like,
that's
I mean,
it's
it looks. If you ask me, now no one does, but if you ask me, like, I think there's a real hang up about sex in Ireland, and the real hang up is that we're actually afraid to express normal, healthy sexuality,
that's right.
and
Yeah,
everything now has to be gay. You can't
that's
just
right.
be
Yeah,
like to even highlight. Oh, look at that! Look at how fucking beautiful that woman is. Like, you know, oh, she's attractive. Holy shit! You can't even say this now. Oh,
that's right.
this is creepy.
Yeah,
Oh,
you're a
misogyny. You
misogynist.
know,
Yeah,
I saw there was someone was having a go at your man Mick McCarthy there, the lad in Galway that the video guy, like, and he had a picture of his new girlfriend, like, and these guys are trying to like make fun of him because he has a girlfriend. Like what is it?
I
Like, I
know.
thought he's supposed to be an incel. Is he not an incel? No, like, which is
That's
it? Like,
right. Yeah.
there's all this hang up about just normal people, like just having normal relationships.
But you see, that's the role of the therapist as well, because, like, just say hypothetically, okay, this scenario, there's a 12-year-old called Tom, and his best friend is Jerry, right? Tom and Jerry. And Jerry, anyway, his family has to relocate from Galway to Sligo because his dad has a new job. Tom is upset because Jerry's his best friend. He's known him since he was 3. They do everything together, right? They play football, they build camps, whatever. Remember, this is prepubescent, so he's 12, right? Anyway, his mother, because of some interventionist at school who recognizes Tom is not his usual self, right? And the thing is, there's a simple answer. He just misses his friend. That's what it would have been in our day. Oh, Jerry, sure, you can write to him and listen, you get a new friend, whatever. At that age, things are fairly kind of you know, transient. But invariably, what happens today is the child is sent to a psychotherapist, and the psychotherapist asks little Tom, "So, why do you miss Jerry?" And he goes, "Oh, he's my best friend. I think about him all the time, blah, blah, blah." Suddenly, the therapist, because of the culture of today, starts saying, "What do you mean you miss him? Is there, do you think of him sexually?"
Yeah.
And no, I'm not joking. Like, I would say there's so much imprinting and conditioning going on
Yeah, I mean, if
that,
you look at all the queer theory people and all, and they look, and not even queer, even now in literary studies, basically, which is a whole area. We could do a whole thing on that. Like, that is just literally a way of just perverting culture completely. Like when
Yeah,
they look at an old text, all they're trying to find is like, oh, this guy is probably gay. Oh my
yeah.
god! Like, there's the same thing, and there's in America, like they make out that which one was it? They make out all the founding fathers all were having sex with
Oh,
all
that's
of
right. Yeah,
slaves and all,
yeah,
or some
yeah,
of them were gay and all this. Like,
yeah.
and they'll take some totally
Out of
innocent
context.
line
Yeah,
out of context, because basically, number one, they're not educated enough to know how people wrote in that time, or
that's right.
they pretend not to.
Mm,
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe they're just lying. I don't know.
mm,
But like, they'll take something like that and they'll make this thing about it, and then all of a sudden, then all the Greeks were gay,
that's
all the
right.
Romans as well, man. The Romans were gay,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
this becomes
Everybody was.
pop history. Then, you're in the pub some night, like, and some guy turns around, like, with his pint of cutting Carlsberg and says, "Did you know all the Greeks were gay?"
That's right.
Oh yeah,
But you're
absolutely.
saying
Yeah, you're
Saying
intelligent.
Bridget
Yeah,
was an abortionist. And again, they
abortionist.
take everything out of context because she had said some prayer to get rid of a baby, but that it doesn't follow that she was promoting abortion.
Of course not.
Like there's these kind of bizarre inferences because they're all observed through a kind of a feminist or racial or whatever lens or queer theory lens. And suddenly everything, like, as I said, any kind of male friendship now in the past is going to be reinterpreted as latent homosexuality. It's
Yeah,
absurd.
yeah,
But that's because I believe, and this is where go back to the slogan, and I know we'll get back to the education, but this is all actually related because what that slogan, love is love, really says is that all forms of love are sexual, really.
yeah.
Because any type of love now must be expressed sexually. So if you love your dog, if you love your if you love your kitten, well, you might as well get off with it. I know
Like
that
cats,
sounds.
eh? Like
I
cats.
know
Yeah,
that's.
we know what that means. Yeah, I've got a pet
No,
cat
but
as well. I have to be honest here.
and I hope I'm not being crude, but that is the reality. Everything now is like I knew a guy and he legitimized incest for that reason. He said, but I don't believe in God, so there's no, ultimately we're just matter in motion and there's
Well,
no
this is
such
like
thing
the
as
Vouch. This is like the Vouch episode. If you know that weirdo communist. Well,
mm,
not, he's not a communist. He says he's a communist, but he's actually just basically a
a contrarian.
deranged
Yeah.
individual. Basically, like most of these guys looking for attention on the internet. But like, he basically had this. He's a famous streamer on the left, quote unquote, and he has this there's this famous episode where he's streaming live. Now, this is like every streamer's nightmare. If you ever share from your PC a file or something, and all of a sudden some porn folder of his is exposed live on the stream, and
Mm,
in this, like, everyone, obviously this got clipped from the stream, and people started finding out what, like, somehow people knew what these videos, they were able to find these videos, maybe use an image lookup or something, I don't know, but they were able to find what these videos, a lot of them were,
mm,
and some of them are literal, like, bestiality videos,
mm, mm.
and this is a guy, like, who has defended, like, certain practice. I won't even say, like, certain
Yes.
practices,
Yeah.
and like, and I'm kind of going, like, this is like, you are an encapsulation of these errors, like, that this is where this leads, like, and this fucking moron is on the internet, basically influencing thousands of people, millions probably, I suppose, I don't know, millions of young people, basically, who don't know any better, who probably don't have good parental guidance,
But sure,
and
Jean Paul
inculcating them
Sartre
into this way of
and
thinking.
a lot of French intellectuals signed a letter in the early 70s wanting to get rid of the um, age of consent in France. And sure, we know that Foucault was a co-signer, and we know his what he was up to in Morocco, and that's the thing,
Allegedly. Mhm.
allegedly.
Well, he's dead
But
now, so he can't sue us anyway. So yeah,
yeah,
fuck him. He was
but
doing that in Morocco. Yeah.
yeah, he was doing it. And the thing is, though, like this is where this ultimate subjectivity comes in, and that's why we're saying it's very dangerous because on its face, it looks as if a facilitator is just helping someone to come, to express their core inner self. But even that is presupposition because what do you mean by the self? And that's where the facilitator starts to mold what do they mean by the self. It's like Rogers would have. I said it the last day, right? That according to Rogers' theories, or approach to psychotherapy. He had positive, unconditional positive regard. And of course, he, lent on Maslow's self-actualization. But if you've got a character like just Ted Bundy, right, who felt immense freedom and liberty and autonomy and felt very self-actualized when he was killing co-eds, Rogers would say, no, but that's a distortion, because ultimately that's a blockage of the true self. So it's unfalsifiable, completely
Yeah.
unfalsifiable, because if it's not in coordination with what Rogers believes is self-actualization, well, then it's a blockage. But that's completely the opposite of non-directive. That's directive. It's just a
Yeah.
very subtle form of it.
Yeah, and we're back here to I mean, you kind of finish out the essay kind of on basically kind of making those connections, basically, that facilitation does not equal liberation, really. And this is like E. Michael Jones with the famous book, Libido Dominandi, like sexual liberation is basically a form of political control. You
Of
become a
course.
slave to your vices, basically. You
That's
can't
right.
control yourself because you're not in control of yourself. How can you be liberated if you can't even control yourself?
That's right.
And so yeah, you draw on Philip Reeve. Actually, I think he does as well. Philip
He
Reeve.
does, actually. Yeah, I didn't know that until I read the
Mm,
book. Yeah.
yeah, and so that was interesting because like I said, I've only recently got into him. You brought him up to me, but I knew about him inadvertently. I wasn't sure of the name, but through other people's work. But yeah, the therapy basically then is a social procedure that's now being
Mm.
applied through these kinds of programs. Basically, that's the message here, and basically, you know, uh, McCarroll draws on Vogelin and his concept of demonism, which
Mm.
is basically is the displacement of a person's inner world. Basically, some aspects may be benign or even good. So yeah, like I say, health education. Like I'm not against all sex education. Obviously, you have to learn about your body and everything. Parents have to teach you about your body as you're developing as a child. Like
Yes.
this isn't like no one is like I don't think anyone would suggest that that's wrong.
But I suppose as well, like, as I said to a friend, human beings have been around for thousands of years. Like, I mean, I can't imagine, you know, uh, there being this kind of sex education in order to procreate. I mean,
Yeah, they
okay,
managed it
dare
like
dare I
before.
say you learn on the job sometimes, but yeah, I
Yeah.
concede. Yeah, I mean, you have to have a basic level of knowledge. But by the same token, there's almost this impression that, oh, society won't reproduce unless we do this, which is
Yeah.
absolutely nonsense.
It
You
is,
know?
yeah. I mean, obviously, yeah, yeah. It's kind of like, I mean, people managed it forever, like so. I assume they
Yeah,
could. I mean, ironically, we're having less sex than ever, allegedly. I'm told. I'm led
exactly.
to believe from the data anyway that we're
Yeah,
having less sex than ever, or maybe like two people are having all the sex and no one else is. I don't know.
that's right. Yeah.
But the thing is, I'm not one of them. No, I'm joking. But the thing is, like, the thing is, like, this whole like sex education kind of thing is obviously the most obvious, like, and health education. This is the most obvious kind of avenue for all of this non-directive kind of stuff to come in, and it came in, and it's still in, and so these concepts they're still around. They're still informing like there's all kinds of different programs. There was Stay Safe in the 90s
Mm,
that came out. That was a big thing. There was the 80s even as well. Actually, I think
mm.
when I was in school, that was a thing, and basically you finish up with and then I'm going to play some of the clips from that thing actually. You say the facilitation program is not a moral formation program with some problematic techniques. It is a behavior modification program whose entire structure presupposes an account of the human person as a total organism determined by its emotional life
That's
without
right.
objective moral reference, without transcendent orientation, without genuine freedom that is incompatible with any account of the human person that holds the objective moral truth exists and can be uh, that objective moral truth exists and can be known. So yeah, it's the opposite of that, and that's the kind of message of the essay. It's I recommend people read it, and it makes it familiar with some of these terms. We're building a case here. Basically, we're working through this whole little area, and that's how it came into Ireland. Basically, now the activists. If you want to say anything more about that, actually, I think I will pull up this if you want. If you want to make any more points about all that.
Well, there was a kind of a juridical analysis as well,
Oh yeah,
and that's what kind of
yeah.
McCarroll
Bring that up.
lent
Yeah.
on. because when he wrote it, it would have been during the 80s, so prior to the 31st Amendment to the Constitution, the rights of the child. And McCarroll refers to Article 42.1 of Bunrock na hÉireann as it was then. And he names the family, of course, as the primary and natural educator with an inalienable right and duty over the child's religious, moral, intellectual, physical, and social education. And of course, there's another article, 42.4, leaves the state's role tertiary, with teachers acting in loco parentis. And it's reinforced by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26.3, where the parents' prior right to choose and the Catholic Charter of the Rights of the Family, sex education must be under the close supervision of parents. But that was written during a time when there was still really hands-off approach with regards to the state. There was less interference. Now, there was always, listen, the state always had to interfere in certain elements, like if there was neglect or abuse. But the point is that a lot of what McCarroll points to as a defence is now kind of moot on account of the 31st Amendment and effectively the rights of the child, because as I said, the rights of the child are mediated through state operators like
Yeah, and let me just interject that the thing you're talking about there is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which was ratified, I think, in 1989 or something like that.
Mhm.
But basically, that was what that referendum, the so-called children's referendum, in 20 was that 12, 11,
That's right, 2012.
2012, yeah. Well, that referendum was because we hadn't ratified all aspects of that. And
Mm.
so that was an example of the UN once again, basically directly influencing. And there's a whole story can be told around that about how all that came about. But basically, if you look at that, another time we'll do that, I'm sure. But basically, that was a whole story, but in itself. But that whole referendum was basically the institutions of the state basically saying we have to convince the people to do this. This wasn't popular will.
Mm.
This is the state manipulating popular will.
And the way it was presented as well, you see. I mean, who doesn't want the best interests of the child? Doesn't want to look after children or care for
Yeah,
children?
and that was the first of those big. That was the beginning of the big referendum decade. You
That's
had the
right.
2012 children's referendum. I remember that it was in the middle of the worst recession ever, basically,
Mm.
and I remember that going on. And I remember John Waters was one of the guys. He was front and foremost
And
trying
he
to
was
fight
right
that. And he was
again.
totally right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
fairness, he was totally right. And he was on telly and all. Like he was a more mainstream figure at that point before he had kind of
And he was
dropped out.
castigated again because, again, they distort and strawman his position because they were saying that, oh, how could you be not for rights of the child? But that was not his position. It
Yeah, and
was
see, that's
about
that's that's an
it was
example of the
about too
media.
much state interference, and we know
Exactly.
now
And
how
that
dangerous that
couldn't
is.
be that couldn't be communicated.
That's right.
The media would not let that message be like that. That is a form of basically you want to call it facilitated communication or strategic
Exactly.
communication. The media fulfilled a strategic communication purpose on behalf of the state, and
Exactly.
it was actually shocking. Like that, and then yeah, and then that continued. Then and it still continues. It's worse now, actually. If anything, but that continued. We had all those referendums came after that. Then gay marriage and all this stuff
Mm,
and all the same tactics, emotional stories
that's
about
right.
here's
Who
a gay
wouldn't want
fella and
Johnny
his
and
family.
Jerry to get
Yeah,
married? But then you see what people weren't told was that, well, if Johnny and Jerry can get married, well, then under other legislation and constitutional provisions, there's equality, which means that they should be entitled to surrogacy almost and all other different rights. But you see, Kirk and Madsen spoke about this in their book, Gaying America, The Gaying of America After the Ball.
after the
And
ball. Yeah, yeah,
he purposely said that, listen, in order to get this over the line, that we must purposely um, uh, ensure that we restrict our activism to that is only palatable, effectively, to the normies. Because like, if the people saw the full breadth of that lifestyle, people go, I don't know, uh, that's a bit too, kind of. I'm not too sure if I'm on board with that. So Kirk and Madsen, and of course, one was a marketing executive, both Ivy League trained.
Yeah.
And they said, listen, in order to do this, we must be very, very particular in how we frame not only the movement, the gay movement, but also how we frame the opposition. And that's why they, if you look, and I said it again last week or the couple of weeks ago, that invariably on RT, if there is a debate, a bit like what Noam Chomsky said about kind of you know, there'll be a limited spectrum and lively debate within that spectrum. But there's also this aspect that the interlocutor on the other side, they'll choose as some kind of, uh, inarticulate, uh, quick to temper kind of character to mischaracterize one side of the argument. And then they'll have three very eloquent, calm interlocutors on the other side. And of course, they can then say, oh, we were balanced. We provided both sides of the argument.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole host of things could be said about that. Like, and and the fact is that a lot of those campaigns, like, they actually dominate the professions as well. People talk about gay
That's right.
mafias and all this, but you don't even need a
That's
gay
right.
mafia. It's just that the fact that there is a lot of them in the professions, in the legal profession, and they're
I'm
very
sure the
skilled.
church is absolutely ruined. I mean, there's a term called the lavender mafia,
Yeah,
and it's caused havoc. And sadly, people now equate nearly every clergyman with being a homosexual. Now,
yeah,
many of them are sadly today, but like I think that's due to infiltration. And of course, we're seeing like, okay, I'm going off a bit on a tangent here, but what people really don't understand unless they're interested in aspects of religion is that there's a huge civil war going on in the church. There has been for the last couple of decades. People think that there's this monolith, but there isn't. You've got on one side people who are appalled at the scandals and who want to bring back tradition and put Christ as center. Then you've got these progressives who have instantiated people of, kind of. There's a book by a guy called Michael Rose, Goodbye, Good Men, and he talks about it way back into as far back as the 1980s. And there's another author, was he? Is he? I think he could be French, and he's a homosexual activist. And he wrote, I think his name is Martel, and he interviewed loads of Vaticanistas, I suppose,
Mhm.
people working in the Vatican. And according to him, nearly 80% of those in the Vatican are homosexual. So,
That's
like,
shocking.
it is, but the thing is, for those of us like myself, Creda, Marcus, we on Saints and Scholars, we're trying to tell people that it's like the Moat and Bailey fallacy, where they attack uh, a very superficial argument, and then they put out an argument that is very superficial, and then when you come back to attack it, they revert to a very different strain and deny the original proposition. And
Yeah,
that's what they do because, like, a lot of the assaults on the church that I would agree with were terrible, but they were carried out by pederasts, effectively. So people then associate people who acted contrary to the faith with the faith itself. And of course, when it comes to all these referenda, there is no moral voice because, effectively the church's voice is neutered because it's seen as deviant itself. But that's
yeah.
not the case.
I have to say, like, I mean, and you know what I mean. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I do believe in, I am a Catholic, but I'm not a really, I don't really go in for religious. I don't talk about religion very much. And like I am struck by like the way that Ireland has totally collapsed because of this. Like, I think an atheist could see this at this point.
Yeah.
Like, when this is a very strategic implosion in my view. Like, that they've managed to just kick the chair out completely, and there's this new hierarchy has been brought in. Like, and it's fanatical. Like, they're just fanatics.
Well, I address some of this in a book I've written, actually, and it's
Yeah,
on
actually,
nationalism, different aspects of nationalism. And religion is very important because it provides a metaphysical context for the nation. For example, in Catholic belief, I know I'm going on a bit of a tangent here, so apologies, but the belief in subsidiarity is, we're all made in the image and likeness of God, and we have immediate duties, ordo amoris, towards those in our immediate care, so your family, and then it extends. It's like a concentric circle. It's like throwing a pebble into water and the concentric circles move outwards. And so you've got family, locality, region, nation, then international community, or, shared neighbours internationally, whatever. And you've a duty to all those. That's why, nationhood is a very Catholic principle. And that's why I think they want to get rid of all the. Gramsci spoke about it because he articulated that in order to really seize control over the West, uh, one has to erase or neuter the pillars that support the West, the structures that support the West. And the pillars are the family, invariably the Catholic Church. And they're probably two primary ones. And the family is constantly under attack. I mean, thankfully, we were able to defeat the progressives in government when they tried to remove certain aspects of motherhood from the constitution. But like what I find remarkable, and listen, I like reading history, but Ireland, you cannot talk about Ireland without its Catholic faith. And now, even among some nationalists, they'll say, "Oh, to hell with that." But the thing is, then, are you willing to eject something that is in the country for 1,600 years? Like, if you're willing to do that, you might as well. Like, where's the consistency? I mean, like the penal
No one is
laws.
saying, and no one is saying you have to be like some fanatical,
No,
like a
you
religious
don't, but you
person
have
at
to have
all.
respect for your ancestors. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
our ancestors were persecuted, the penal laws. They were persecuted. I mean, you had the Confederacy laws. You had the famine, which Chris Fogarty says most distinctly was because, not just because we were Irish, but because we were Irish Catholic. Because according to the British, they saw Catholicism as not just a religion, but politically adjacent. So, like, I just think that this has been one of the greatest psyops, in a true psyop, not the bogus ones that's ever happened in Ireland. And listen, hand in heart, I would say that 95% of clergy that I've met, I haven't liked. I hate saying it, but it's true. Now, it doesn't follow that that means the faith is wrong. That would be a category error. So I think even our own side are very emotionally led. They don't. We've lost the ability to critically think, even on our side, because you can, like, I wouldn't stop going to my GP, going to see a doctor or a dentist just because a dentist or a doctor was rude to me, because they're two separate things. One is a person, the other one is, an institution. So I think that's why, in a way, if you look at the education system, it's gotten people to obviate any form of ratiocination or reasoning, and instead supplanting it with sentimentalism. And I've spoken about this even in the church. Like, I believe there's a heresy called sentimental pastoralism, where everything now is sentiment. As long as I feel this way, well, that matters. Actually, the Catholic faith is about faith and reason. Like, if you read anything by Thomas Aquinas, G.K. Chesterton, Hilaire Belloc, I mean, there's a litany of intellects. And that's the problem with today. The West has lost the ability to think rightly. And sadly, a lot of people have fallen, even on our side, for these kind of, I suppose, these programs, you know.
yeah,
That's why I think our education system is key, because it's going to reproduce people who are not able to think for themselves. And like what Dietrich Bonhoeffer said way back in the 40s, when people don't think for themselves, even if they're intelligent, like he spoke about stupidity. And he said, don't confuse stupidity with a lack of intelligence. By
mhm,
stupidity, he said, people outsource their reasoning to institutions or an ideology, and their ideology becomes fused with their own identity. Therefore, if you challenge even legitimately the ideology, it becomes an assault on someone's identity. And that's why people react emotionally to that, because they no longer can separate the fact that they're talking about something, an object, but it then becomes a subject. You're attacking the subject. And you see that especially on the left. I mean, look at some of the trans activists. Some of those people are, should God love us, lunatics,
Yeah,
Anyways,
absolutely.
sorry, Don, I went
I
on
know,
that.
yeah, and I actually found it, I have it here on Amazon. If anyone is interested in that, I'm going to drop that in the description here as well. After the video, that is Bosco's Handbook of Nationalism, Volume 1. And you can get that on Amazon and have it directly there. If you have Prime, I guess you get it with free delivery, actually, I think.
Yeah.
So,
Now, the cost but it's 700 pages. There's about 52 essays. And I only make £3 because Amazon, there's many pages to print, and Amazon get more money on top of that. But even the money I do get, I'm donating it because I'm not interested in the money. I just want people to start thinking. And it's not to say that I have all the answers. And in fact, Don, you and I have spoken about this before. We're not saying we have the answers, but we're just trying to get people to start to think and to
yeah.
say, listen, there's stuff here that is available. And on that, Don, I must ask as well, and I said it to our mutual friend, that this material has been out since the 80s, Manley's book and McCarroll's book, but nothing has been done. Why
Yeah.
wasn't there there was an alarm sent out. That's why McCarroll wrote the book, but nothing was done. Why? We have to ask that question. Why was nothing done?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's
Especially
been
by so-called conservatives.
yeah, well, I mean, you know what I think about the conservative movement, like, I mean, not much, but like that's the trouble. I mean, the the intellectual work like hasn't been kept up with, like, and
No,
it all fell away, and I
that's right.
suppose you could argue that it was the economic booms and all the rest of it that happened, but the culture just changed fundamentally,
It did.
and like when you read those books now, like, it's like a totally different country, you know.
But
Now,
I mean, when you think of it, though, you're looking back as far as the 70s and 80s, and they were sounding the alarm.
yeah, I mean,
So
and they went to the extent of like bringing Coulson and
that's
several other
right.
people over
Yeah.
here. Like they
Mhm.
actually were organizing. I'm going to play actually. I'm going to play these. I've obtained this through a source. It's not publicly available anywhere. This is actually William Coulson. It's an audio recording of him in UCD in 1993, and this is like an hour and a half of recording. Obviously, I'm not going to put it all on here, but here he is. Yeah, this is a picture of him. There's no picture. There's no video, obviously. If anyone has a video, send it in. But I'll try and convert it. So I've tried to boost the audio as best I could. This is a cassette tape that's been transferred to digital. And I just play the introduction here because you actually hear that these guys were dealing with the exact same problem of censorship, of having meetings intimidated out of being held at that time in the 80s. Like, so
Mm,
these people were dealing with now, it's not just woke,
mm,
it's not, we're not just dealing with the left and the woke, this is an ongoing thing. And back in
mm,
the 90s, these in the 80s, these guys were having trouble
mm.
organizing meetings.
Ladies and gentlemen, if we may bring the meeting to order, please. Thank you all very much for coming. I apologize for the lack of accommodation, but given the fact that we're videotaping this particular meeting and to transfer it to another theatre would involve transfer not only of personnel, which is easy enough, but of equipment, I
I don't hear anything there,
and
Don.
ask you to put up with the
Really?
somewhat overcrowded
Yeah.
conditions. The meeting tonight is...
Okay. Hang on, maybe it's not coming through. I've only got one audio. I've only got it in one ear. I wonder. Yeah, I'll have to check that in the because I was trying to do that today before I came on basically, and it hasn't obviously come out that well. So I only have it in one ear. If someone could say in the chat, could you hear any of that? Oh yeah, yeah. Last Gale says he can hear it, so it's coming through one ear.
Okay.
Better than nothing for the moment.
sponsored by two groups, the Newman Group, which is a group of academics in UCD. We've been meeting on and off for the last 15 years. And so we sponsor quite a few meetings, most of them for our own private purposes, but some public meetings. And indeed, if we can afford it in any given year, we organize what we call the Newman Lecture, to which we invite various prestigious people to come and give us lectures. The meeting tonight is organised in connection with the Education Forum of Ireland, and we're very... Sound cannot be heard at back for people there. Okay, I'll speak up. Well, it's all right. He's got a mic, okay, so you're okay for him. I'll speak up. The Education Forum of Ireland is an association of graduates and educators throughout Ireland which highlights issues both national and international in the field of education, and the chairman is Canon Dr. O'Driscoll. Now, our speaker tonight, just a few remarks before I introduce them. First of all, I would like to try and finish by approximately 9:30 because we have to clear the building. And Dr. Coulson will speak for an hour or a little over, and then we will have questions and discussion. And I would appreciate that you would address your question to me and that I could repeat it into this microphone so that we will have a record of your question so that viewers of the video will know what the question was to which Dr. Coulson is responding. The second point is that I just received this particular little document before I arrived. It says, protest the pro-child abuse meeting on campus. Okay.
So this is what they were dealing with back in 1993. This kind of like hysterical, like people would call this Antifa now, you know. So they're calling them, this is a pro-child abuse meeting. This is the kind of shit that people were saying about these people, you know. Just trying to have an intellectual discussion about this important subject, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And proceeds to make a lot of statements, some of which are actually libelous, okay, but of course, conveniently, there is no name on the bottom of this particular document. It says at the bottom, however, we are appealing to all interested groups to protest this meeting, including heckling the speaker so that the video cannot be used. Now, if there is anybody here with that intention, please could I ask you to reconsider, okay, in the interest of free speech and democracy, allow us to have our say, do not heckle. If you have objections, you may make them at the end of the discussion, as may anybody else. Our speaker this evening, Dr. William Coulson, has a PhD in philosophy from the University of Notre Dame. That's my own alma mater. He has an EDD in psychology from Berkeley in California. That's a doctorate of education in counseling psychology. He did his postdoctoral internship in clinical psychology with the neuropsychiatric unit of the U.S. Veterans Hospital System. He was a research associate to Carl Rogers at the Western Behavioral Sciences Institute at La Jolla, California, and director of programs in the philosophy of science and postdoctoral clinical psychology. He has published Groups, Gimmicks and Gurus, in which he analyzed the various destructive effects of the use of encounter groups in education. Rather than go any further and having introduced my speaker in this way and established his credentials, may I now present you with and ask you for a kind reception for Dr. William Coulson. Thank you very much.
There he comes on anyway. But there's a couple of little things that I just thought would be interesting to play for the audience. That's just the introduction. I wanted the people to see like that this kind of thing has been going on for years, basically. People have been like dealing with this kind of radical censorship and a determination to stifle basically having a simple political discussion or a philosophical discussion, you know, for decades in this country. Mm-hmm. So we're deep in a process of radicalization here, you know. And also he mentions, actually, he talks about Maslow. I want people to hear this because he talks about how Maslow regretted how this was used in education. So if I can get that exact moment right here.
It only prevents time that could be invested in academics from being invested in academics. None of these programs that are based on early Maslowian or Rogerian principles actually do what they're advertised to do, and this is one of them. And one reason is because they've got this little kid sitting up on top of Maslow's pyramid, and he's not supposed to be there. Maslow said it was never meant for children. I'll give you some of his 12 reasons why children are not capable of self-actualization, but right now I want you to notice this boy's expression. He's really quite satisfied with himself. He has to be in a trance. He cannot be comfortable. He's sitting on the pointy end of the pyramid. You see, and he's not only getting stabbed in the bum, the whole thing is about to fall apart. The sides are greased. It's a house of cards. The guy that designed it and built it says it was never meant for children. You can take that down. Maslow got to sniffing around the various programs that had been too enthusiastic for what, after all, were speculative writings on his part. in the 1950s on self-actualization, and called it, before he was quite sufficiently suspicious of it, called this network of programs like the Western Behavioral Sciences Institute, Esalen Institute in Big Sur Hot Springs, which came to Ireland in the 1970s. 200 some institutions that he called the Eutychian Network. Remember, he wrote a book in 1962, I think it was, called Eutychian Management, and Maslow's hierarchy is still influential in management training. But he got to sniffing around this network once he saw what was happening to his own students, and he said, I get, finally, the smell, quote, of sadism and masochism. He wrote this in 1968, May 17th, 1968, in his journals, just a little over a year before he died of a heart attack at the age of 62. Killed himself, really, worked himself to death trying to correct the record. It got into the journals, but the journals didn't get into print until 79. Long after we needed them, long after the movement could be stopped and the genie shoved back into the bottle. It seems to be unstoppable now. I get the smell finally.
Okay, so that, yeah, you didn't hear that, Bosco, but the audience heard it. But basically, that's Carl Roger. Sorry, that's not Carl. That's Coulson basically describing how Maslow came to reject all of this being applied to education, and he began investigating towards the end of his life. He died of a heart attack kind of prematurely in his early 60s, but he actually tried to correct the record, so to speak, and get all this, because he saw his students were being taken off in the wrong direction, and it didn't matter. It went out. It was picked up by this institutional network, and the ideas took on a life of their own, and they just continue to reverberate. Around basically, and Rogers was also a little bit unhappy about certain aspects of how it transpired as well. So that is basically, I'm going to try to fix that audio. I might try upload that sometime. Someone says there I could probably make that into a stereo recording. That's just like a mono recording that I brought into not iMovie, the other one, GarageBand. I can try and I'll definitely be able to make that stereo. That's just a matter of flicking a switch and re-exporting it. But that's
It's funny you were saying there, Don, though, about kind of that they regretted it, and you often think that, is that not a feature of modernity, this kind of recklessness, this kind of opening of Pandora's box, and then once it's opened and can't be closed, it's kind of, sure, what's the harm? I mean, we see this across so many different features. I mean, the most obvious for all of us is the mass immigration. I mean, as any form of experiment, even if we were call it experiment, I mean, it's far more insidious than an experiment. But the people who are going to have to deal with the consequences of this are not going to be the architects of this. And this seems to be something that is very, very apparent across so many different disciplines,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like there's no personal cost to these people to do this. Like it's the coming generations that deal with it.
That's right.
I'll just go to a few comments before we close out. I think we've covered a good swathe of territory there now tonight. That was good. So yeah, Stephen Flynn says, evening lads, perfect timing. Love listening to these working at home. Keep up the great work. Appreciate it. Gig Should is there as well. He says the relativization of everything and the distortion of the laws of logic is the insidious underpinning of educational brain rot. Well put.
Yeah.
Very well put, Gig Should. Laws, and he also says laws of non-contradiction, etc., are flouted, thus the ability of institutions to push ideas like LMNOP agenda. I actually don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. LMNOP, I don't know. But I'm sure I would agree.
It's the other alphabets. It's
something I shouldn't say, is it?
It's the LGLMNOP people.
Okay, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I agree then. And TJWK Ireland says, good evening. Good evening, TJ. Good to have you. And Scowls McJowls, he has a whole host of comments. It's good evening. He's got he says a lot of different things. Good to have you. Flooded Cuts is there. Scowls McJowls also says the chains of liberation. Absolutely. He says behaviorists can move civilization in any direction they want. Human cattle. To an extent, yeah. That is behavior modification is absolutely has totally transformed how people behave in the West. That's what's going on. It's weaponized psychology, basically.
That's right. Yeah.
Flooded Cuts says, good evening. He says, irony is a highly misused term. Well, I think I'm using it correctly this time, but I know what you mean. It definitely is. Last Trugale is there. Welcome. He says, E Unibus Plurum, Television and US Fiction by David Foster Wallace is a great essay on the damage irony does and has done. Also notice it's the default kind of humor of progressives. Yeah, excellent point. I'm going to have to look that up. That's an interesting essay. I didn't heard of that before. That's interesting. E Unibus Plurum, Television and US Fiction. Yeah, I'll look that up. And irony is the humor of progressives. Everything is just like, oh, I don't really like this. Oh, imagine liking this. It's like people are afraid to admit they like something, or they have this other phenomena of guilty pleasures. Oh,
Yeah.
I don't really like this song, but I listen to it because it's a guilty pleasure. No, you like the song.
But it's like what we spoke yesterday about, Don, off air, that the inconsistencies and the contradictions that we see on the left, the most obvious is being kind of queers for Palestine. And for those of us who like to think some way rationally, we kind of go, but how does that square itself? But as you and I discussed the other night, it's irrelevant because rationality has nothing to do with it. It's power. Power is the object. Power is the means. And whatever is, or power is the ends, rather. And no matter what means are used, even if they're inconsistent or contradictory, it doesn't matter. That is the left. And until people start to recognize that we're up against something major here, and even when we call it the left, the liberal left, the globalists, I mean, they're all kind of labels, but ultimately what we mean is people who just want, a globalist society that is under total control and where the people think themselves outside a prison but are actually inside a prison.
Yeah. And Last Trugale also says the Constitutional Convention set up a lot of these in 2012. He means he corrects himself underneath. In 2012, the 2024 referendums came from UN pressure about women in the home as well. That's absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, there's this whole process. The UN is a huge thing. I mean, it becomes like a kind of a, like, people can maybe some people consider it to be kind of, oh, it's crankish to be talking about it, but it is real. I mean, they like things like the UN conventions against racism and discrimination, for example. Those are literally driving policy directives and compliance procedures that continue to this day. Ireland goes to the Committee on the Elimination on Racial Discrimination every couple of years, prostrates itself before this committee, and gets told that, oh, Ireland is very racist, by, like, some collection of administrators from, like, some Gulf state, an African country or something, and, like, yeah, a lot of this is voluntary. We sign into it, but it does have effect on law, and it is upheld. It creates legislation. Like, they create legislation based on this, and they do apply it. Like, the reason we have hate crime laws is because of outside, like, directives that we've agreed to. So this stuff is important, and with the education as well. I did an article a couple of years ago that I updated there a few weeks ago, which is called "What is the UN doing to Irish Education?" It's on the Substack. If you go into the description, look at the Substack link. It'll bring you to it. You'll see it there on that Substack. And it's all about, like, how the different UN institutions like UNESCO and World Health Organization directly influenced Ireland's RSC development, basically, and SDG 4 as well, with the education and the Sustainable Development Goals. This stuff is real. It is real. Like, there's no way out of it. It has to be addressed openly. Very important. And LMT Liam says all types of priesthood, be it the church or the media, will attract homosexuals simply because they can be offered protection by the institution. Their loyalty is guaranteed. Well, if you look at modern Ireland, it seems to be they're in charge of a lot, yeah. And also, homosexuals are drawn to influence institutions like media and the church because they get to guide social policy in their favor, providing them with further protection from persecution. True.
Yeah.
Irish Furrian says Deuteronomy 28, how we lost our nation. I'm not familiar with that passage. And also he says Catholicism imploded, read the Bible. So he's kind of coming from the Protestant persuasion, I guess. He's kind of the Bible only, Lutheran, that's it. To do Lastergale says, Scales McGill says, it's the baby out with the bathwater. Lastergale says, I completely agree on Bosco's point on our side and their thinking. A lot of weird contrarianism, and that means they are easy to influence. Yeah, I think there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of people are kind of pointing this out, but like, I think there was a big inflection point with the COVID stuff and all, and it brought a lot of people who hadn't really thought about a lot of these things before, kind of were a bit shocked by that, But to be honest about it, if you come at it from the way myself and Bosco are thinking about it, you shouldn't really be shocked about it, especially when you kind of listen to these streams we've been doing and these articles that Bosco has been writing, because you can kind of see how it happened.
But also, Don, like, they're not even neutral when they're weird or benign, because I've spoken to friends who are on the kind of just say normies, and you'll speak to them and I'll say, listen, kind of just listen to the other side, just see what we have to say. And they'll come across some kind of nut job who's on about, I don't know, lizard men in Connemara or something. And that's going to be the representative of our side. And these people who are kind of going, well, I'll give the other side a go, and then they'll suddenly go, which is wrong. I mean, it's cherry picking, and it shows an intellectual laziness, but still, they'll just concede and say, well, they're people I don't want anything to do with.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be intellectual work. I mean, we said this before the last stream, like you kind of made a little point of picking up on this, or maybe it was the one before, I can't remember. But basically you said something along the lines of, like, we're not doing this for our ego or
That's
to
right.
feel smart or to be like, oh, aren't we all intelligent, reading all these big books and all? Oh, look at us. No, this is like...
It's boring. Yeah, exactly.
It is boring.
We get no enjoyment out of it. None.
Like, we're working at this. And we're not asking for any money, so we're just doing it because it's important. Like, this is actually vitally important work that has to be done.
Right? I love my country, and this is what I can do. Everybody has their own way of contributing. So I do understand. This goes back again to what I was saying, is that if you do get grifters out or whatever, like, they sully the entire environment for everybody. Now, like the book that I'm putting out, as I said, I'll only make €2 per copy, but I'm donating that. I've already said I'm donating it. I'm a Catholic, so I'm going to donate it to the repair of a church. So I've done that with a previous book I had. And as you said, Don, we're not in it to make money. For a start, there's no money to be made. And secondly, that's not our goal. We love our country.
Yeah. And if you don't do this work, basically, like I'm always make a point that this isn't basically knowledge production. Like, when you create an academic or an article, an essay, or some kind of journalism or whatever it is, and you shed light on something, or you articulate a point that hasn't been pointed to before, or you emphasize a point which is not emphasized enough, you're engaged in basically knowledge production. You're engaged in what is basically institutionally walled off from most people.
Yeah.
And these institutions, like, they're very good at selecting certain academics to become popular, and their narratives, they train all of the people in every institution in your society. They all come from this. And if you're not able to articulate and understand what they're doing, if you have to understand what they're doing, how it influences policy, how it influences society, etc., and you have to be able to respond to that with your own critique, and if you don't have a consistent worldview that you can lean on to do that, a perspective to draw from, you are basically just going to be being manipulated all your life, and you're not going to be able to move nationalism forward. You're not going to be able to change anything in your society. So one of the reasons that I think a lot of people are worried about the slop matrix, if you want to call it that. Someone was calling it that on Twitter, like the slop matrix. The slop matrix is... it does trap you, like, because you get stuck in this place of reacting all the time.
Yeah.
And reacting doesn't actually mean you're doing anything either. Like, and there's a tendency to assume that just because someone isn't involved in, like, protests or something, that they're not doing anything. And the truth is that this is actually very important stuff. Like, if you don't engage in this kind of intellectual work honestly and pursue it, basically your ideas aren't going to be permeating, and you're not going to
Yeah.
be bringing people to a higher level of understanding about anything. And that's
No, I will
the problem.
say, like, if there's a guy who has waving a flag going to a protest and that's what he does, I've no problem with that at all. We
Yeah.
all have our different talents, and we all play a role in the love of our country. Some people might be energetic doing citizen journalism, other people might be writing essays, other people are contributing in another way. I have no problem with that at all. I'm not a kind of an elitist in that way, and I know you're not either, Don. But what we're trying to say is this is not about posturing from either of us. This is about saying, listen, the best way to defeat an enemy is to understand them and to understand where we're going, at least inferentially. We may not be right, but at least we're trying to understand. So the problem is, like, we live in a culture now where there is no genuine discussion about matters anymore because it's just all one side. And as I said, even if there is the pretense, and that's all there is, it's within a spectrum, it's lively, but a very narrow spectrum, and it's ultimately meaningless because the interlocutor representing us is usually someone incapable because they want someone incapable because they don't want to hear the other side. And that's why important for people like yourself, Last True Gale, Irish Furian, uh, Garrod, a lot of them out there to keep talking, to keep, kind of, expressing the position of our side because you're not going to hear it anywhere else. You're not like.
Yeah, it's important to be involved in intellectual work and cultural work and all of these things. It's very important. And if you're not doing it, no political movement has ever succeeded
That's
without
right.
having some kind of intellectual core. Okay,
That's right.
like, how would the American Revolution,
That's right.
take it away from Ireland, how would that have succeeded if you didn't have all of those guys like drafting that new vision for what America
Mm.
was going to be? Now
Yeah.
it got turned into something, whatever, but like, and you could say the same thing about Ireland, like,
Yeah.
those men had a very definitive ideas about what they
That's
wanted
right.
to achieve, and they had
Yeah.
written those ideas down. They had
That's right.
discussed them, they had argued them, they had debated them, they had pamphlets, there was different organizations, they were a confluence of different people, there was communists involved, there was all these, there was all kinds of people there, but they were all drawn by the love for their nation,
That's right.
and they were doing that work, and they all, it's a very important thing, and that's yeah, let's just leave it at that. Basically, that's the message. It really, isn't it? Like, that's why
It
we're
is
doing.
done. Yeah, it is. Listen, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's a great conversation as always, and I don't know what we're going to do next. We'll see. I'll be back in a week or two anyway, and I'll have plenty of other things to do anyway. But everyone, thanks for watching. If you would subscribe to both of us on the links in the description there, check out Bosco's book. I'll put that in the description after the show. You can get that on Amazon. Support that work. That's that's an immense contribution, and it should be respected. Like, when people do that, give their time like that to do these things. We'll be back soon. Everyone, take care. I'll talk to you guys soon.
God bless. Bye bye.